Good evening. Welcome onto Gadigal country. My name is Graham Sims and I'm a descendant of the Gadigal people who have maintained a continual connection to this land throughout all of our existence. I was born on Gadigal country with family connections to neighbouring clans of the 29 clan groups of the Sydney Basin, known today as Eora Nation, and to the Yuin people of Nowra on the south coast. I am a long-standing proud gay Koori man, Gadigal man, of our Sydney tribe of sexually and gender diverse First Nations people, and I pay my respects to all my elders, past and present. It is an honour for me to walk in the path of my elders. A welcome to country is a very important ceremony of our ancient culture, the oldest continual culture on our planet. The offer of a welcome to country is to say, yes, you are welcome. You are welcome onto our country to stay a while or to travel through. And we thank you for the respect you have shown to us by firstly acknowledging us as the custodians of this land, with our laws and our customs. Today, a welcome to country is performed out of respect for this tradition and to formally acknowledge whose country you are on. To any First Nations mob here this evening, I acknowledge your presence and your people, and in doing so acknowledge well over 500 different Aboriginal clan groups that have existed on this continent and surrounding islands for tens of thousands of years. And I proudly acknowledge our First Nations people of the Torres Straits. Thank you to Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras for the honour of welcoming you all onto country to share this wonderful evening of storytelling, celebrating and acknowledging the rich and wonderful culture of diversity of trans life. I wish you all safety on your journeys home. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and thank you to Graham Sims for that wonderful welcome to country. Just a little bit of housework here. If you could just make sure your phone's turned off to silent. You're very welcome to take photos tonight, but just make sure there's no flash because I don't look too good in the flash these days. I'd like to send a warm welcome to everyone that's watching us online tonight. So this has been live streamed, so we've got quite a few people watching us online. So welcome to everyone there. So my name is Peta Friend, and this is my trans story. No, not tonight. I'm just kidding. Most of you here tonight I've told my story at 2 Mardi Gras events, plus I spoke at the Brisbane Powerhouse event and had the honour of speaking in the My Trans Story lineup at the Opera House digital presentation last year. And it was such an honour to be at the Opera House. It certainly beated waiting on the tables there like I did in the 80s. So I'm here tonight because this is my baby. I came up with the idea for Trans Stories, which was its original name, to highlight the diversity and rich history that is the trans and gender diverse community, and also to shine a light on our future, our emerging leaders, our emerging identities. I invited our current producer, Lisa Freshwater, to help me produce it for the 40-year anniversary of Mardi Gras, a perfect opportunity for us to step up and take centre stage. And Trans Stories 40 Years was created in partnership with Mardi Gras for the Queer Thinking Festival. This is now our 4th year presenting My Trans Story, and I'm so proud of it, and the support from Mardi Gras has been overwhelming. But you know, a lot has changed over this time for our community. There are a lot more stories. There is a lot more visibility. There are a lot more trans and gender diverse people in the public eye. And yet visibility is not enough. In fact, sometimes visibility can make you more vulnerable to discrimination, ignorance, and even hatred. Note to self, don't ever read the comments section. My trans story has given us 27 brave and beautiful stories that have spanned several generations. I've been so honoured to share the stage with these incredible individuals. And tonight, I'm thrilled to introduce you to 6 more amazing speakers that will share their stories of rising up. And that brings us to our first speaker, Joel Murray. Joel is a trans, non-binary queer person living with HIV. They currently work for a community organisation managing health programs, advocacy and research partnerships for sexuality and gender diverse communities and people with HIV. Joel is also an avid gardener and singer. Please welcome Joel Murray.
My name is Joel Murray, and this is my trans story. My life's a congruence and an incongruity at the same time. My singing teacher thinks that as well. I love the arts, all of them, especially the performing arts, more specifically, music theatre. Don't MT shame me, #show queen is fine. My favourite musical is Sunday in the Park with George by Stephen Sondheim and George Lapine. Who else in the audience is familiar with that musical? Oh, I can see there are a few #show queens here this evening. Sunday in the Park with George is set in 2 acts. The first act follows the life of pointillist and chromoluminist artist George Seurat and his muse Dot. Pointillism and chromoluminism. Why is that important? It's important because when examining the individual pixels of colour from afar, we see all the colours of a rainbow. And Seurat knew this. George is so obsessed with finishing his painting, A Sunday on the Island of La Grande Jatte, that he didn't see his losing Dot. He is focusing on the micro, not the macro. The second act is based in 1984, focusing on George and Dot's fictional great-grandson, also called George, who is an artist who uses technology in the creation of his contemporary installations called chromalones. You get the reference? One of the major criticisms of the musical when it first came out was that the 2 acts didn't seem to fit together. In the 1984 privileged, narrative-driven music theatre world, this did not compute. Historically, stories had been explained to the audience. Sondheim and Lapine were trying to wake up the audience to be a little more woke. Curious that in that Tony Awards year, 1984, the winner of the Tony Award for the Best Musical was a Jerry Herman tome celebrating the French film La Cage aux Folles. I am what I am. You may think I'm a Francophile, but I'm not. Back to Sunday in the Park. The first act of my life is in pursuit of the arts, becoming a professional performer. And the second act, my life without the arts. Well, sort of. Act 1. I was born on the Gold Coast but grew up in Albury, a Wiradjuri country. Don't shame me. My family attended a church affiliated with the Assemblies of God. Think happy clapping and praying in tongues. And if you don't know what that is, think hand on head, go boom. The only good thing for me about regular church attendance was that it was where I first learnt how to sing. I joined school choirs and musicals, and I took any opportunity I could to perform. As I got older, I started to sing more competitively, joining an elite statewide choir that went on to sing at the Olympic and Paralympic opening ceremonies, state school spectaculars, and in the Sydney Opera House. I had not considered performing arts as a career until this point. My parents, being realists, had always prefaced my abilities as being a big fish in a small pond, whatever that means. As more and more auditions for elite singing programs and 2 offers into the Newtown High School of Performing Arts, I started to believe that I did have talent. However, my parents did not allow me to move to Sydney to finish off high school. A Sydney chapter of my life that never came to be. After high school, I moved to Melbourne, being the closer city to Albury and was also cheaper to live. I continued to pursue singing, acting, jazz, tap, ballet when I could afford it, and decided that the most efficient way to train was to get an audition for a musical, a community musical. My first community musical was Mac and Mabel by Jerry Herman, where I had to quickly learn some tap routines. Then came Cabaret by John Kander and Fred Ebb, where I nerded out on Fosse-inspired choreography. And then there was this Australian musical called The Wild Blue, which I actually think should have been called The Absolute Blues, because it included a song about the Twin Towers collapsing. Now, as an aside, in that musical, I played the character called The Boy Who Wanted to Be Veronica. And I'm not sure if they were supposed to be a drag queen or a trans woman, and I'm not sure the composer and writer did either. So I did a range of assorted plays, script readings, and even directed a cabaret for a close friend of mine. In 2007, I auditioned and was cast in a community production of Cats, and this was my most significant dance challenge to date. I was working for the state government at the time and decided that I wanted a full professional music theatre experience. I took leave from work so I could focus entirely on the intensive 3-week season. Up, up, up to the Heaviside Lair, over and over and over again is hardly a good bedtime story. And touch me, it's so easy to leave me was not exactly the affirmation I was looking for at the time. Although my diary is clear later. This experience completely changed my outlook on music theatre as a career, and I decided I didn't want to pursue it anymore. Congruent, incongruent. I donated all my music theatre anthologies books back to my former high school and recycled wads of musical theatre sheet music I had collected over the years. You must remember, it was my parents who taught me tithing. If I could not be a performer, then why not use my business acumen in managing performing arts companies? So I pursued an arts management internship with the Cunningham Dance Foundation in New York City, spending the end of my 23rd and the beginning of my 24th year in the summer of New York City in 2008. This experience opened my eyes to different perspectives. I immersed myself in the queer and arts scenes and very much felt like I had met my people. Now, Mum and Dad, you might want to close your ears for a second. I partied, I fucked around, and I had the time of my life. At the end of my internship, I was offered a job, but since I hadn't been to university, the visa system was complicated and too expensive for a not-for-profit to sponsor me. So upon returning to Australia, I enrolled in a Master of Arts Management, hoping that I could complete it and return to the US and work for Cunningham. Then the global financial crisis happened. And then, in 2009, Merce Cunningham, the godfather of modern dance, died. My New York chapter closed. Act 1 is closing. Instead, I ended up working for a bunch of innovative and well-regarded Melbourne arts companies. However, the decisions that I had made recently in my personal life, acquiring HIV, Hep C, drug use, some people collect stamps, all impacting my work in the arts. I completed my arts management degree and then never worked in the arts again. Interval. Act 2. I decided to run away to the Gold Coast. No shaming. Like a salmon returning to its place of birth, this salmon was swimming in a sea of incongruity. What a Saturn's return. I was lost, emotionally and professionally. Physically, I was tired from living with untreated HIV and Hep C, and the persistent drug use I couldn't seem to quite kick, despite knowing that it was holding me back. Can't help myself. Bad habits. I returned to Melbourne and began working for the adult industry lobby, and surprise, surprise, their political arm called the Australian Sex Party, which has since rebranded to Reason Australia. My health significantly improved from starting HIV treatment. I ran as a candidate several times for both federal and state politics, and through these experiences, I had developed an interest in public policy and landed a job working in a peer-based community organisation for people with HIV. I thoroughly enjoyed this work, and through diligent work, ended up with an offer to work for a similar organisation in Sydney. And this felt right. Sydney had always been calling me, and here was an open door ready for me to step through. Very early on in my time in Sydney, a good friend and mentor suggested I book subscriptions to the arts so that I had in my diary throughout the year an opportunity to immerse myself in something that was not HIV, that was not angst, but was an escape and a stimulation of a different kind. I'd not been an audience member of the arts in many years. Spectating the arts in my second stint in Melbourne felt too raw, both from my perspective as an artist and arts manager. But I took my friend's advice and I found that I had been dissociating from the arts, starving my inner child of permission to have a rich inner creative world. I was finding congruence. Then last year during COVID-19 lockdown, I reached out to a friend who had been my singing teacher from ages 17 to 21 and who I had remained in contact with. "Are you teaching online?" I asked, and I've been in singing lessons ever since. In fact, we're in the middle of writing an original cabaret about my experiences with HIV. So what the hell, sorry Mum and Dad, has this got to do with Sunday in the Park? Act 1 had nothing to do with Act 2. The narrative stopped. When we tell our stories, the closer to the truth, the less things seem to make sense. I was sitting in the park thinking about how I was working in community health while also having a rich connection to the arts as a patron, audience member, and artist. The two acts of my life do have a synergy, a congruence, which, in my opinion, could also be said for Sunday in the Park with George. Now, which way do I exit? Stage right, stage left?
A standing ovation from Teddy Cook. Our second speaker, I'm so proud of this young lady. Her name is Olivia Stewart. I've known her for about 4 years now, and I've seen her blossom into a beautiful young woman. And I've also had the pleasure of getting to know her mum, who's here tonight, Lindsay. Olivia is 16 years old and in year 11 at a local co-educational high school. She has a strong passion for woodworking and art and is passionate about languages, particularly Japanese and French. After experiencing hardships associated with being trans, she is committed to telling her story to increase acceptance and support for trans teens like her. Being 16-year-old, she gave us some wise words before we came on stage tonight. If you stuff it up, you'll have something to talk about in 5 years. Please welcome Olivia Stewart.
I dare say I'm a bit nervous, but here we go. My name is Olivia Stewart, and this is my trans story. I was no stranger to the Mardi Gras, a set day in the calendar for an exuberant expression of pride, but this annual event was, until the year of 2018, something I had only ever experienced through the television. I had not expected it to have ever become a close-up and important part of my life, but that year everything changed. That year I joined the Trans Pride Australia float. A few months before the Mardi Gras parade, I was 13 at the time and had only been out as trans for a couple months. My mother had decided that she and I would benefit from being a part of the Mardi Gras. She, being a networker and passionate activist, found Trans Pride Australia online, and she asked the wonderful organisers Lisa, Peter and AJ, who I believe is in the crowd up there, if we could be a part of the parade. I am sure that when my mom and I turned up for the rehearsals at the Newtown Community Centre, they were all a wee bit surprised. 13-year-old me, who at the time was a wee bit reluctant, and my mother, who was only brimming with passion. As well as this, I found myself to be by far the youngest of the group. Despite our differences, we were generously made to be welcome and were allocated our place in the dance lines, and we started to learn the moves. However, a few weeks prior to the big day, I lost my nerve, scared to be a part of such a large event and to share my identity with the world. So I withdrew from the float altogether, giving up my place in the dance line to a more keen and willing substitute. Despite this, my mother decided that she would continue to represent as a trans ally and went to Newtown for the rehearsals even when I was not there. Then, just finally a few days before the parade, after some introspection and what one might only describe as a serious case of FOMO, I decided that I would bring myself to take part in the parade again. Again, generously, Peter, AJ, and Lisa accommodated me. I could not be a dancer though, as I had not yet learnt the moves due to quitting rehearsals halfway through. And besides this, someone else had already taken my place. Luckily, I was given a new role, carrying a styrofoam letter as part of our slogan. To me, in fact, it was a promotion. Well, when I woke up on the day of the parade, instead of feeling joyful and prideful, I sulked through the morning in a cloud of dread. It was terrifying for me, with my aversion to large crowds and social events, to believe that I would voluntarily submit myself to such things. And as well as this, I was submitting myself to intense public scrutiny. Although only one person in a crowd of many in the parade, I was still, at this time, would be announcing myself as trans to the public. Marching in the Mardi Gras would have been excruciating exposure. I really, at the time, sad to say it, found myself rather unaccepting of myself. I was trans, but I wished that I wasn't. I did not want to own my identity. I did not want to be trans. Nevertheless, with encouragement from my mother, I was able to get on the bus and perform the solemn commute to the city where we were to meet with the other members of the Trans Pride Australia float. Our meeting place was, in an act of irony, outside St. Mary's Catholic Church, an institution which has so long persecuted and rejected not just trans people, but gay people as well. As we waited there for a while, I saw my fellow trans participants approaching. I felt some of my doubts and fears drifting away. These were my people, and although none of us directly talked about it, there was a connection and shared sense of camaraderie that ran between those people and I, a tacit sense of shared experiences, a subtle comfort of being around others who knew really what it meant to be me. Of course, despite this, I was still nervous. As I mentioned earlier, I was the youngest in the group, and with the next oldest being 20, I had 7 years to go before I could even compete. As a result, I did find it a wee bit hard to relate to the others and their discussions. Nevertheless, despite this difference, I was embraced by everyone as one of the members, as one of them. After everyone had arrived, and we had been endlessly photographed in our outfits, not by just each other, but also passerbys who were enthralled by the spectacle of our motley group. But it was time for us to be ushered to the marshalling area of Hyde Park. The closer we got to the park, the more colourful the crowds around us became. Hyde Park was unrecognisable, walled off like a forbidden city. Yet, it was through those gates that I found myself transported to another world. A world in which I could only describe it as the closest thing to a surrealist painting one might ever see. Oh, the costumes that people wore. On that day, I thought the sexy, half-naked reindeer man could never be beaten. Then around the corner, a more insane and fabulous costume would come. You see, when people say that the Mardi Gras and events like it are about being able to freely express oneself, they mean it. People go all out on who they want to be, without any fear, and it is quite a sight to behold. For them, acceptance is not gained by reducing themselves and submitting to the limitations set by others. Instead, they display themselves as the brightest possible versions that they can be, a vibrant picture of human expression. For me, though, the experience was a bit of a sensory overload. I wondered, realistically, how much can a person take in before it's too much? Don't get me wrong, I was happy to be there, but for a quiet 13-year-old me, it was quite a shock. Although Hyde Park felt like a celebratory dreamscape, the real festivities would only begin at dark, so we had a few hours to spend before our float would set off down Oxford Street, before we would display ourselves in our pink, blue and white glory, the customary colours of the trans flag. These hours were filled with endless dance practices, riotous laughing, singing, watching, eating, talking, and sharing. But finally, after what felt like a lifetime, it was time to line up on Oxford Street to get ready for the journey ahead. I found myself wondering about the logistical challenge of lining up hundreds of floats down the street. Luckily, our float was near the front, led by an army jeep designed to fit with our costumes. Camo pants, dog tags with a trans flag on them, all designed as a rebuke to the recent decision of the 45th President of the United States to bar trans people from the military. Thankfully, recently, that decision has since been revoked. While waiting to depart, I bumped into a trans friend of mine from school. She was marching with the trans parents and kids in the Gender Centre float, which, mind you, was probably the float where my mother and I should have ended up. We had encountered a miscommunication of sorts, and both on the day of the first rehearsal had found ourselves at different locations. I do say it is quite astonishing to me that such a miscommunication could even happen, that there are even enough trans floats to even have that to be possible. Around us, seeing the fellow kids from the Gender Centre made me feel a little less alone in the world. Eventually, the time was right, and the parade began. From where I stood, watching as each float set off, I felt a heightened sense of tension. Each one departing meant I was one step closer to setting off myself. Was I ready? Could I do this? Could I really acknowledge myself as trans in front of thousands of people? Nevertheless, I've said that a lot. Time marches on. The clock struck 8 and our group departed on our journey down Oxford Street. I brandished a long pole adorned with the enormous glittery letter S, the last letter in the first word of our slogan, "This is me," shamefully stolen from the title of the song with the same name from the movie, The Greatest Showman. The speakers on the back of our Jeep belted out that song as we went. They belted it out with such ferocity that I felt as if I was going to melt. Oxford Street stretched out in front of us like a red carpet, paving the way for the kings and the queens of the Mardi Gras. As I walked, I felt a growing sense of liberation, of being celebrated by people prepared to rise against the shackles of transphobia. I felt enormous and important, and yet simultaneously dwarfed by the sheer enormity and absolute scale of the people who had come out in force to display themselves so loudly and so proudly to the world. As we marched, we danced and sung. I was awestruck by the explosion of noise, of colour, an organised sort of chaos, a spectacle of like I have never seen. Enormous crowds stretched to my left and to my right. The beautiful bright floats to the front and the back, person after person in the crowds reaching out for high fives across the chasm of the road, eager to share in the magic. It was exhilaration incarnate. The air was of celebration, the celebration of one's right to be oneself, the right to love anyone and to be anyone. On that day, marching along and looking behind me to see my mother dancing, I was struck by one thought above more any other. Wow, she is the furthest thing you could think of as a Mardi Gras dancer. But her loving attempts to dance, to be there for me, showed such support and love that I've never forgotten it. The support and love which, by extension, I could feel from the love and support of my family and my friends and the friends of my family and the friends of my friends. As I walked, I felt like I was a part of something greater than myself, a movement. Yet, still, at the same time, my individual experience felt 100% important. This was it, this was me, and this was us. Finally, what felt like simultaneously the longest and yet shortest hour of my life, we arrived at Moore Park, the final stop. It was over the Mardi Gras celebration, at least for me. Despite some of my generous group members offering to sneak me into the over-18s after party, I was too tired to continue. Besides, I feel as if my mother would have not let that one slide past. It felt like a brave new world had opened up to me, one where I could feel less shame and disdain towards myself and instead replace it with pride and confidence. On that day, I turned to my mother and I said, "Can we do this again next year?" And so we did. The year after the parade was also incredible, but nothing really compared to my first Mardi Gras. At that time of my trans journey, having such an event completely changed how I looked at myself and how I viewed myself as a trans person. It was an event that let me see my trans identity as not something that is to be ashamed of, but to be proud of. And the fact that I'm here publicly speaking to you today of my experience is proof of that. I'm a woman, I am trans, and that is okay. Thank you.
your parents are here tonight. I'm going to embarrass you. I just got to say, can you please stand up? This. I got to say, this is what unconditional love and support looks like, and this is the result. And I just think it's fantastic. It's not about me, it's not about me. Okay. For once. Okay, our next speaker is Rusty Nannup. Rusty is I knew I'd stuff this up. Rusty is a Yamatji Noongar woman, which are the two very largest tribes in Western Oz. She moved to Sydney many years ago, living and working in Darlinghurst. In Rusty's words, having lived this long and seeing the many changes for us trans people, it's still very surprising that society have enough time on their hands to judge us and our life choices. What's the old saying? No pain, no gain. Please welcome Rusty Nannup.
Hello. I guess, my name's Rusty. I'm a trans woman. I've lived a very long time. The luck of the gods, so they say. But the time that I come from, because remember, I'm a 1961 model. You can turn me upside down and I'll still say the same, 1961. So things were a hell of a lot more different compared to what's happening in the last 20 to 30 years. But a bit about myself was that I grew up in a little old town called Kew. It's no longer on the map anymore. It's just a little one-horse town that had more kids, dogs and one goat than there was adults. So Tiffy was the dog and Funny Face was the goat. And every time anyone came to town, they wanted to know where all us kids were. They used to say, oh, we'll look for the goat. So, but Funny Face was also pretty good, very protective of us. So long as you didn't bend over, he wouldn't have knocked you in the arse. Long as none of the family members bent over in front of him, especially when you're doing the washing, pulling up, you would never got hit in the arse. But that was just one of the many things that we had to, I guess, there was nothing there for us. No television, no radios, so we just learned to play together, fight together and get up to mischiefs together. But the mischief side of things was now my cousin, Ricky. He's a terrible, terrible boy. He used to steal Uncle Reuben's bullets. Now, Uncle Reuben is my mother's older brother. Now, if you'd have known about those days about bullets and that in the houses and that, we all grew up around guns and that, so we all knew that these things, you know, with the 303 you can take half your gut out, had a small hole over here and a big back hole. So he used to knock off his father's bullets and then we'd go to a place that was called Nigger's Dam in those days and we'd light the fire and we'd play cowboys and Indians and all of a sudden he'd either throw the 303s or the 22s in the fires. We needed to have sound effects. There was nothing out there, remember? So you had all these bullets flying around and people arguing about, you know, who was supposed to be dead. I shot you, the bullets still flying around, and none of us was ever killed. Mind you, when they found out where the bullets went, we did get it. We copped it and we all copped it all together, so there was no blaming about, you know, who did this and who did that wrong. So the old days was, you know, one of you got into trouble, we all got it. So, but that was the way that we were brought up with my family. My old mother sort of like broke the mould. She had 6 sons and I was one of them. But I deep downly believe that my old girl was thinking about having another girl. Somewhere the hormones or whatever didn't gather up and collect, and she got stuck with me. So the old girl never complained. Now, back in the 70s, trying to buy clothes for somebody that was skinny as me back in the 70s was... Mum used to buy it from the girls section because I couldn't fit normal men's jeans, if you can call men normal. And she just got that way where, you know, she'd buy the jeans, she'd buy the tops, you know, and there I am prancing around. Then I'd dye her hair and she'd dye my hair. So we were pretty close, the old girl and that. But it took her a long time to get through the head that your wish had came through, old girl. You didn't get yourself a boy, you got yourself somebody better. And that was me. Now, there was no such things as trans back in those days. You either was a homosexual, you was a transvestite, or you was a lesbian. And that was the labelling that society gave us at times. But within my own peoples, I was always the girly one, the dainty one, or the funny one. So I prefer those labels than what I would have gotten from other people, and that would have been the homosexual or transvestite. But that was them. So, but growing up over there, like I said, West Aussie was totally different. There was no such thing as a gay scene. There was no such thing as a lesbian scene. Connections was the only nightclub. But I was young enough to know, I was blessed enough to start knocking around with party girls. So I got into a little bit of ship moulling when I was young. And I also did a few ocean cruises. But you could always do those things back then. Living back there where I was in the northwest, it was mainly heavy into mining, mines here, mines there, everything else to do with the mines. So somebody like me didn't really fit in. I didn't fit in. I dabbled when it came to sex. I enjoyed the company of men and women. And many years later on, somebody once asked me, do you identify as bisexual? I said, no, I'm greedy. There's no labelling on that. There's no labelling on that. I think that's one of the sins in the Bible about gluttony. So I was a glutton. But then I think the best thing that ever happened to me in my whole entire life, and that was coming to Sydney back in the 80s when the old girl was known as the cesspool of the South Pacific. Now, wasn't that an interesting name for me to come in and wallow? Wallow in the cesspool of the South Pacific. Coming here in the 80s was the fun and the games and the cross, the sex working and all that, everything else that goes with it when you are young. Towards my mid-20s, I thought, well, might try something else, and it was something that I've never tried before, and that was working. 9 to 5, and not the 5 to 9er. Get that straight. So this is a day job now, and in those days, you know, because getting a job was okay. You had, you know, the right presentation, if there was such a presentation, you know, of the female, whatever they thought of you, and you go for the interviews, and they'd say, okay, then you had to drop out your old IDs, you know, your birth certificate, which was pretty hectic, because in those days there was no, you know, you either got the job or you didn't. A couple of times I was refused because they took what was on the birth certificate as the gospel and not the person that was standing there in front of them. But that was okay, because I ended up working with some really damn good people. Then the days came when I was able to change all my legal documentation, and in doing so, that was my way of burying that part of my life forever. There are some people out there that might think that, you know, it's a joke to refer to your past and that, and I just look at them and say, well, go and get a life. You know, you're the ones that's stuck in a one-horse town. I'm not. I live in a city with over 5 million people. God forbid. But working was pretty good, and the fact that you was getting paid every weekend, every fortnight. The fact that I ended up becoming a bookkeeper. I worked as a cashiering clerk. Not bad for somebody from the back blocks of West Aussie in those days, but it was something that I quite enjoyed. But it also came with a bit of a curse as well, because being trans and living around the cross, we was a very close-knit community of people. So for one of us to try and kick down the ghetto walls and go out and try and find our lives, it became a very little bit of nasty side of things for some of the ladies. You'd be working in organisations, somebody would be having a bad day, so they'd ring up, you got a cock and a frock working there for you, But I was very blessed that I had co-workers that shielded me. And to this day, I'll sing their praises from the rooftops, you know. Interesting also was the Christmas office parties. Now, the Christmas office parties back then in the 90s, and that was, you know, we all get together, we'll all get on the slops and we'll have something to eat and that. It was also the time when all the pimply-faced male boys thought it was okay for them to come out and try and grab you on the tit or on the arse. So you bang, 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 you're beating them off. And they were thinking that it was a joke, and, you know, well, I suppose we wore it because we thought, well, okay, then this is just the one time of the year. So we did, but because of that, where we had to keep our head below the waterline, and that was denying who you were, we had no choice in those days. I worked with another sister, and she worked on the 8th floor while I was down on the 3rd. The only time that I could ever acknowledge her, or wish she could ever acknowledge me, was when we were in the lift by ourselves. We didn't have to say a word, she'd just go like this to me, and I'd go, meaning that we survived one more extra day without being sprung or outed. And that was the way it was. It's took me a lot of years to come out and admit that I'm a trans, because usually I identify as being just a straightforward black woman with a trans experience. But nowadays, which I think is pretty good for everyone, is that, you know, you can be a trans man, trans woman, a trans bloody well bird if you wanted to be. And it is okay. You don't have to worry about anybody wanting to hit you, look down their noses at you, spit on you, you know, just because you happen to have a life and they're angry about something. So I've had my fair share of people springing me, but I used to laugh it off because I used to think, oh, well, girlfriend, you know what, you wore your skirt too bloody high, drop them down a bit, you know, button up a little bit, you know, because they want to look at your tits and stuff like that. So I just learnt, and I learned to accept it. Back in the cross, there used to be some very horrible times going on with the girls around me. There was violence. I had to identify of a girl who was murdered. I was only 25, and I look at that date as the day I became an adult. I became responsible for a girl that died a brutal death. Then I had to deal with everything else that came along with it. And then somewhere down the line, I hit 50. And I thought, what the fucking hell's going on here? Pardon me, because, you know, when you're young and you're in your 20s, I never thought I'd get to 35. 35 came along and I thought, well, okay then, girl, you can deal with this. 40 came along, then bang, the 50. And it was a really good day. It was a really good time for me because, you know, I was comfortable within myself. Life was good, life was bad. I was alive. Friends of mine are still loyal. It was at that stage where you're turning 50, I was thinking, well, okay then. Sitting down the block there with the girls, I had a 50 moments, you know, I was crying. Oh, I'm losing everything. Nothing's going to happen to me. My life's finished. And these ladies said, girl, that's the best time of your life. And I looked at them and said, what do you mean? They said, you're turning 50. All that rubbish that you had to deal with when you were young You don't have to worry about that no more. You don't have to impress anybody. You're 50, so roll with it. It's a good part of your life, and I do believe it has become a good part of my life. I've just still got to get over turning bloody well 60. Now, that is scary. But being who I was, coming from the West Coast, you know, and the isolation, there wasn't anything for us. Like I said, the best thing I ever did was leave. And coming to New South Wales, I've been here a hell of a lot longer being alive than I've ever been in my home state, so that says so much about New South Wales. The world of a trans woman, a male, a trans whoever, it's totally different compared to what it was for me. And to see all the young ones and the middle-aged ones and the ones that are on the sunny side of life like I am, to sit back and have a look and to see all these experiences, and then to see these young men and women get out there and stand up and say, well, okay, then I'm trans. If you don't like it, just step out of the road. And I do think that is, for myself personally, is something that I never ever thought that I'd live to see. The fact that I could go into a doctor's surgery. Once upon a time ago, it was just male or female, so I was just conditioned to go female, female, female. I went to the trans clinic up here at in the Acon building 414. All the lists of designations. And for the very first time in my life, I ticked trans woman. And I thought, oh, that's a bit game for you. You're getting a little bit bold, because for the very first time in my whole entire life, I actually ticked the trans. And so, you know, I thought, oh, okay, that felt really good for me, you know. It's the conditioning, and that will always stay with me. But the fact that I can just go along and tick the trans anytime I choose to, what more can you do? I think the world is, whether society, be they black, white or brindle, they need to cherish their trans diverse children, because once upon a time ago they just threw them out in the street like they were rubbish, without realising that this person that you've thrown out, this is somebody, a part of your own body, and that's somebody that you love. You sit back and you talk with the individual, you will find that this person has got a hell of a lot to contribute. And just because they choose to be different doesn't mean to say that, you know, they're evil. There's other people out there that have done worse things than what a trans man or woman can ever do. And, you know, just being honest with yourself about being who you are and going out there and holding your head up high, you know, it's empowering for you. So I'm really stuck for words. Help. Get me off here. But the fact that you guys can actually go out and do what you wish to do, that still gets me thinking, because remember, from that period of time to when, you know, you can go out and you can live your life the way you want to, you're protected by the laws and that, compared to what we had to endure. It's amazing, and it'll always be amazing. I will never stop being amazed till the day I drop dead, because, you know, trans people are people. Very, how would you say it? Very forward-thinking people. Giving them the chance, you might be surprised, you know, they will do things that you may never ever think that you could possibly do. It's their brains that's important to me. Their bodies is their own business. You leave it alone for them to deal with. Good heart, good soul, and most importantly, never walk away from your people or your communities. Even though you'll have those that want to chuck stones at you, that's okay. I've had that thrown at me. For that one person, there's 10 others there that'll say, okay, then you piss off and leave her alone. And that's a nice thing for me. So I never ever had to worry about the backlash from my own people. The only backlash I had to deal with, and that was every time you went to a new town, they used to have what they call the pugs in town. Now, in my case, I had to fight with the women, the local pug women. So I learned a long time ago, back in those days, was that you learn to give a hide and you learn to take a hide. And so that was just the way it was. And you guys are very lucky that you don't have to face that anymore. You've got your families with you. You don't have to face violence. And most important, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. You are who you are, and anybody's got a problem with that, well, that's them, not yous. Can I get out now?
So, our next speaker, Victoria Anthony. Victoria and Anthony and I go back a long way, don't we, darling? Oh, I've got a lot on you I could talk about tonight. The old helicopter. Oh! Victoria... I'm professional. Victoria graduated with a Bachelor of Music Honours majoring in musicology in 2011, honing her craft in the club scenes. And if you've never seen anyone honing their craft, then you haven't lived. She is one of Sydney's most sought-after DJs, winning the Drag Industry Variety Award, which is the Diva for Most Popular DJ, 2 years running, and multiple title wins at Miss Trans Australia. Victoria curates Trans Glamour, which is a really important event in the trans calendar, and it's currently being held upstairs at Stonewall. And it gives all trans and gender diverse people with their talents just an opportunity to get up, be themselves, and entertain. She is a shining light in our community. Her favourite colour is black, and you know what I mean. And please welcome to the stage. Please welcome Victoria Anthony.
Thank you, Peter. I'll be coming for a facial very soon. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, as Peter said, my name is Victoria Anthony. My pronouns are she, her, and I live here in Gadigal. And this is my trans story. In March of last year, I lost everything I ever worked hard for. I was always involved in the creative arts. I worked 6 to 7 nights a week as an entertainer and DJ. I love music, I love nightlife, I love dancing, but COVID-19 changed all of that. As a child, I would dance and play in the flower beds with little kittens at my uncle's farm, collecting insects and trying to avoid playing soccer and other sports that my brother and cousins would play. I was an amazing dancer. My mother always encouraged me to be creative. She put me in dancing when I was 6, and I was a little star on the rise doing tap, ballet, and jazz. I even won some awards when I was 7 years old. My dad, on the other hand, wanted me to be more boyish, and I also did soccer training and eventually had to give up dancing. Soccer obviously went nowhere for me, and I decided I wanted to quit that. My mother is Filipina and my dad is Italian. My dad would sell flowers on the side of the road from my uncle's farm to provide for us. My mother would stay home and look after us. She loved karaoke, and I would sing with her for hours, and she immediately picked up that I could sing, and I eventually got into that as a teen. I also grew to love disco. Every Saturday night, I'd listen to the disco playlist on Mix 106.5. I love it. I also loved watching Rage and video hits, and I would write down the songs on the charts in a notebook. Another fun fact about me is I can actually skip/jump rope pretty good, and I did that professionally at primary school. Do you want to see a demonstration? Okay, it's about to get real. Here we go. Okay, here we go. Get ready. Don't expect much. I haven't done this for years, and I'm wearing heels. Okay, back to business. Okay, I can let this out now. Okay. I would skip professionally at Jump Rope for Heart, the Heart Foundation yearly competitions, and our school would do pretty well. I don't think I ever really fit in anywhere, and I didn't have many friends, so I would skip by myself and practice jump rope at recess and lunch, and I became an amazing skipper. Somehow, I was also the school captain of my primary school. I did a parody of Wannabe by the Spice Girls in my speech. Yo, I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I want to be a school captain or prefect. I want to tick, I want to tick, I want to tick, I want to tick. And I really, really, really want that until you say cool. That's literally what I got up and said at my primary school. I think the teachers all knew I was different and knew I needed the encouragement to succeed in life. Primary school was some of the best years of my life. High school, on the other hand, I attended an all-boys Catholic school in Bankstown. No more skipping. Singing, though, became my new passion. Those endless hours of karaoke really paid off. I joined the school choir and had to sing at most school assemblies. Obviously, I got teased at school. I got bullied a lot when I came out and told a few boys that I might be attracted to other boys at school. I had to learn to become a shadow. My confidence was really low. I grew my hair out. I spent a lot of time at the school library and read books about art and music. I continued to sing, and I later got singing lessons and joined the local talent group in Bankstown. This was life-changing. The talent group saw me perform at the Sydney Opera House, in Disneyland Los Angeles, and the Royal Easter Show, to name a few. I loved to sing. I would sing Frank Sinatra and really had to embrace the crooner vibe. I also loved a little bit of Bobby Darin and April Sun in Cuba by Dragon. Take me to the April sun in Cuba, oh, oh. Take me where the April sun's gonna treat me so right, so right. I won Performer of the Year when I left the program. On to university I went after coming first in music, first in visual arts, and first in food technology at my high school, while all my bullies watched as I accepted these awards. Thank you. I guess all those lunch and recesses spent alone reading books at the library paid off. My parents sacrificed a lot to put me into a private high school, and when I got accepted into university, they told me they had done their part, and now anything I ever wanted in life, I would have to work hard for to achieve by myself, and that's exactly what I did. At university, I was exposed to a variety of ways I could be involved in the music industry, studying a Bachelor of Music degree. One of my older sisters also worked for a music company. And she knew I had a passion for music, and she got my foot in the door in the music industry. I had to make music playlists for retails, basically curating their music. So whenever you were at Woolies, that was me. I've always been in your ear. I had to make music playlists for retail stores. Oh, sorry, I read that part. I did this while I was on uni holidays. I have to say university was pretty hard, and as a way to escape, I would dance until dawn on Oxford Street with my friend Juan and Sky on the weekends. I would see drag queens performing, DJs playing amazing music, and this was when I realised I really wanted to be a DJ. Singing was still my passion, but I wanted to entertain people like me. I entered many drag competitions at ARC Sydney. I entered some DJ competitions as well. I'd hardly ever win. Somehow, even with all this partying on the weekends, I still got through my degree and graduated with honours. Thank you. Thank you. University grants are incredible. I was able to purchase a really good laptop, and I also bought my first DJ decks with the money. I honestly have to say that being involved in the creative arts can be really fun, but you have to try as many avenues as you can to succeed. I tried producing my own music. I learned how to edit videos, which led to my involvement with Trans Hub last year, and I've done a few Trans Pride Australia float music as well. I learned how to compose music, and I honestly did it all at uni. It's up to you, New York, New York. When I was 23, I decided to finally accept that I was transgender. I was in New York City on a gap year adventure. Once again, all my hard work as an entertainer and my desire to wear many hats as a creative paid off. I dressed as a Playboy bunny and basked for pocket change in Times Square. I also skipped in the New York subway. I even sung a couple of times for people as they boarded their trains. I also got paid minimum wage of $8 per hour to work for a Halloween store dressed as a clown or Super Mario. I entered drag and singing competitions and lost a lot of times. This all was just enough to pay my rent, and I would ration a big bowl of fried rice I cooked at the start of each week and tried to make it last as long as possible. I eventually put singing aside because I was self-conscious of my voice. Imagine the transgender Frank Sinatra. But I think we'll get together, Joel, and we'll sing a couple of tunes one day. I honestly don't know why I did this. I should go back into singing lessons, but any involvement in the creative arts, I would be happy with life. I brought some DJ equipment with me to New York, and I met a party host at a nude music video shoot I did, and I told her I was a DJ. Needed the money, I did. I found myself DJing at a transgender sex party, and it all tied in. I had to set the mood while people would have sex. It was an incredible experience. It was actually quite liberating to know that people were there and desired you, unlike the outside world where people would run away from me if they found out I was transgender. The year I spent in New York was probably the most interesting year of my life to explore my creative side and my transgender side. I came back to Sydney with a lot of confidence, and I think everything honestly fell into place after my transition / affirm my gender. I left for New York as a boy and returned to Sydney as a beautiful young girl. I could get up on stage and rock it. I could DJ and make everyone dance. Word spread really quickly, and I literally lived my dream of being an entertainer on Oxford Street every weekend for over half a decade now. Suddenly that all stopped last year, and I found myself at home doing nothing. I was very depressed. My friend Sky is very forceful sometimes, and she helped pull me out of my rut, and we started making videos and photos for social media, and my spark was reignited. It has been an uphill battle with all these restrictions. I feel like my wings have been clipped. I even feel stupid sometimes trying to do what I love because there are too many restrictions that basically try to and defeat me. I'm DJing to people who are forced to sit down. I can't even run the transgender event I started properly because the venue gets to capacity and people can't fit in the venue. Hope this all changes very soon. I'm really trying my best to be strong. I love to push push forward. In a way, though, I feel like COVID is forcing me to look in new ways of practicing my art. I never give up, and last year saw me on television 3 times. I was one of the guests on the incredible Trans Hub Acon. Thank you, Teddy, for asking me. And I've currently found love, and I have been able to break free from a few shackles, and maybe I'll start singing again, or whatever else is on the horizon for me. And now I'm here for you tonight telling my trans story. I have waited years for this moment, and I am grateful that you have included me in this amazing lineup. Thank you. Please support your transgender creatives so we can keep putting a smile on your faces and give you everything we worked for over the years while struggling to find ourselves and our gender. We need you right now. I'll never give up. Together we rise. Love you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. That was beautiful. You think you know someone till you see them skipping heels. But truly, you are so incredible. And I think that really, seeing what Victoria's gone through over the past 12 months, that's why Mardi Gras is so important this year. We are having a parade. It's at the Sydney Cricket Ground. And I know that you and the Trams Glamour girls are going to be in it. It's such a... We need this. Our community needs this. And now more than ever, Mardi Gras is so important. And I was going to say this till the end, but I just wanted to say what an incredible job they've done in very, very difficult circumstances. And can we please give it up for them? Which brings us to our next speaker, Andrew Guy. Andrew is an actor and presenter, recently in Still Point Turning at the Sydney Theatre Company. Andrew was also the first transgender presenter on Channel 10's The Project. He is a script advisor and advocate for trans representation in film, TV and radio. He was nominated for 2 Australia's LGBTI awards, and he said if he ever wins one, he's going to share it with me. Please welcome Andrew Guy.
Thanks, everyone. Hi. My name's Andrew Guy, otherwise known as A Guy, and jokes on my parents. And this is my trans story. And Lisa, we're having words that you put me on after the high hill skipper after this. That's all I can say. Okay, we're going to shift gears here. Who here believes in serendipity? You know, that idea when you think of somebody and they call, or it's Thursday morning, you've got minus $10 in your account and you get paid tonight, and you put on your coat from last winter and there's a 20. Arts, you'll get it if you work in the arts. Or getting the perfect park at the supermarket right by the door, those sort of things. So tonight my story is a story of serendipity. When a certain amount of people came into my life at a particular time and formed a whole series of events that I could have never imagined or came up with if I'd ever tried. That basically turned into a really important part at the end of my transition. So let's go back. August 2013. Not sure if we all remember where we were then. COVID, Trump, marriage equality, words that were pretty non-familiar to us. A while ago. I've just returned home from my long and difficult trip to San Francisco for my 12-hour final gender affirmation procedure and 6-week recovery time. I'm pretty exhausted, but I have to say I'm actually relieved because I'm at peace within my body for the first time that I could ever speak of, and I can't even articulate really what that feeling is. It just is. I do, unfortunately, also have a minor $100,000 medical debt that needs paying back to my dad, who lovingly loaned me the money at the request of my late mother's best friend and bridesmaid who I'd reached out to for help. So now I'm home. And I'm resting, but tonight I'm at a really good friend's house. We're at his 3-storey swish Surrey Hills terrace. I'm on the couch, still with some limbs elevated in all sorts of weird and wacky ways, and it's cold outside, and we're feeling really cosy. You can hear the rain behind us on the French doors. He's given me a champagne in one hand, and we have a lovely dinner waiting for us after this very essential episode of his Ab Fab DVD. And he says, "I'm Eddie and you're Patsy when we film our trans version." Yeah, okay, that works, sure. And then he strikes a more serious tone and says, "So what are you going to do?" I'm like, "About what?" He's like, "Oh, geez, you're a funny guy. About the loan to your dad, you know, the guy you don't speak to very much at the moment." "Don't worry, that gets better." Yeah, that. I don't know, go back to work, I guess. Feeling really sick at the thought, to be honest. And he says, "Well, funny guy, I've got a friend at the LGBTI Alliance who might be able to help. You should speak to her." I was like, "Great, that sounds amazing, thank you. Good, now eat." So it's a few weeks later, and he's arranged a meeting for me. I'm walking down King Street, Newtown, getting all confused with the numbers. It's cold and raining again, and I'm running late, which is normal, only 10 minutes this time. To say I don't even know what yet, to be honest. And I finally find the door and go upstairs, and I'm sitting on the couch to be greeted by this somewhat Nicole Kidman-esque, tall, blonde person who, I have to say, I'm like, of course this would be who my friend would be, suggesting that I tell my really personal predicament to and ask for help. So he would be certainly chuckling about this himself. Luckily though, she took me inside to one of her colleagues who was a transgender-related health worker, so a fellow open-minded, hearted trans man, who, coincidence, was in a relationship with a medical student at the time who was actually about to go over to San Francisco to intern with the surgeon I saw. So he was actually really excited to speak to me and hear about my experience and said, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to when we can have this in Australia." And yeah. So we had a lovely chat, not much to do with me, which was great. And then he said, "Look, I'm not sure if this would work, but there's this thing called an Act of Grace payment in the federal government's finance division. You could apply to that, go home and Google it." So I left feeling mildly optimistic, but also wildly suspicious. I mean, surely it's not that simple. Just go and ask the Liberal government's finance department. Yes. Good one, thanks. Anyway, no, I did go home and Google it, so just a little bit of information here for us. Act of Grace. The Australian government can make an Act of Grace payment if the decision maker considers it appropriate because of special circumstances. If you make a request, you need to explain why you consider it to be a special circumstance. For example, a non-corporate Commonwealth entity has taken action or failed to take action, and this has caused an unintended or inequitable result for you. Or the Australian government legislation or policy has had an unintended, inequitable or otherwise unacceptable impact on you. So I thought about this and, to be honest, just cut to the chase. I applied and all I said was, why are the relevant Australian medical associations ignoring this medical need in the country? A few months later, I got a response, somewhat surprised that I did, because thinking that they'd probably just shred it or bin it or have a joke. They said, "The Department of Health needs to look at this, apply to the Medical Treatment Overseas program," again, something I didn't know existed, "and come back if they can't help." So the Medical Treatment Overseas program provides financial assistance for Australians to receive proven medical treatment overseas where effective treatment is not available in Australia. I again applied, putting together more of a medical thesis as was the requirement, under the guise of my health practitioner here in Australia though, who said, "Andy, don't get your hopes up," because he knew this department doesn't pay transgender-related surgery submissions. And that is very true, they don't. My Christmas present that year was a letter in the post. My procedure didn't meet their criteria. It was deemed by the relevant medical associations that I was in remission, not cured of gender dysphoria. Merry Christmas. And the most difficult part of this rationale was that I realised that I'd vaguely been set up, because this would then all go back to the Act of Grace division, and all they had to say was, "Well, the Australian medical profession has given their opinion and they say you're not cured." Stumped. So I was a little bit down and out because I wasn't actually expecting this to happen, but then I got a little bit invested in it and thought that I might not have to spend the next 20 years paying my dad back. I was working as an usher in one of the theatres of Sydney, not quite sure what to do next, if anything. And I thought it was a matinee of Ghosts, but I've been corrected tonight. It was a matinee of an all-male version of Swan Lake. Actually, this next line, I'm not sure if this is right now. I was also a little bummed that day because I'd been positioned outside the theatre door rather than inside, because when you're inside, you can, once everybody's seated, you can actually enjoy some of the show, so maybe. Today I was positioned at the entrance to look out for latecomers and help them come in because, once the show's locked out, you need to usher people in quickly. And this was one of about 12 places in the theatre that you could be positioned in that I probably was placed 3 times over the space of 2.5 years. And there was one late runner that day. I let her in. I thought I recognised her, but I wasn't sure. And then, to be honest, there's no time to find out, so you just, get in. And then a few days later, I get a Facebook friend request from a person named Ali, and she said, "Look, do you work in the theatre? I'm not sure, but if you let me in, did you let me in the other day? I wasn't sure if it was you, but if it was you look great." And it turns out Ali is a good friend of kind of an ex of mine who'd come over to my house for a barbecue 15 years ago. Yeah, this is really true. So I accepted her friend request and was like, "Yeah, that's actually me. Amazing. How are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm well. I've just returned from overseas and I'm just starting my Masters in Social Justice and Human Rights Law." Who else is running late to a matinee than a lawyer with clients who's very busy? But it's okay, Ali's here tonight and she was half an hour early, so I've forgiven her for making me have to do my job that day. Thank you. I worked up the courage to ask her. I said, "Look, I've just applied to the medical division in Canberra for some reimbursement of my overseas treatment. And look, their response isn't great. Do you think you could have a read of it and see what you think?" And she kindly did, and she calls me a few days later. I'm on the bus heading into the theatre again, and she says, "Look, firstly, of course, I'm talking to you today as your friend, not your solicitor. Of course, look, I really don't know what to make of this. I don't think you can use terminology relating to cancer in your case, but look, I'm not well researched in the area. Call up Justice Connect and see what they have to say." Again, an organisation I didn't know existed. More information. Justice Connect is an organisation that helps people and community groups connect with legal advice so everyone has a fair chance at a better life. So I called. "Hi Joe, I'm Andrew. A friend of mine who's a solicitor suggested I call you." And I ran through the story again, and she said, "Well, it sounds like this could have greater community benefit, and that it might be something that they could accept as a case if it met their criteria, and that she'd get back to me if it did." A week later, I'm on the bus again, going into the theatre, and she calls to say, yes, it has met their criteria. And what happens now is that they reach out to law firms to see if anybody would be interested in accepting the case. No guarantees, obviously, Andrew, don't get your hopes up. No. And then I spent a lot of time working, obviously, and more on my couch just really thinking about this with a lot of nerves of rejection and thoughts of optimism of maybe this could in some weird way work out. But then also really conflicted with how much of this I wanted to share with a whole lot of government and corporate people and whether this was actually the right thing to be pursuing at all. Maybe this was just a lot easier to let go, So a couple of months went by and I began to think she'd had no luck, and she called me back and said, "Oh, look, I'm still trying, I'll be in touch." And then another couple of months went by again and my hopes began to dwindle and just started thinking, okay, just get back to work, Andrew. And then once again, I'm on the bus heading into the theatre and my phone rings. "Andrew, it's Joe. Look, I'm so sorry with how long it's taken me to get back to you. Today's actually my last day and I've just been really frantically trying to tie up everything. And look, I'm really sorry for this. The way this works is that we ask 3 law firms and then we have to close the case. And unfortunately, I didn't have any luck with the 3 I tried." "Oh no, Joe, that's okay. Look, it was a long shot. I really appreciate you trying. You've done so much. I really appreciate it. But I did with the 6th, Andrew. The 6th firm accepted your case. They'll be in touch. Good luck with everything. I hope it works out." I still don't know who Jo is to this day, where she is, what she's doing, or what compelled her to keep calling, because not everybody would have. So my solicitors call. They're based in Perth. They've assigned a partner, an associate, and a junior associate to the case. and we spoke many times, and it was really humbling to have such warm, intelligent people who knew the law that were willing to argue the point that a gender transition is a process of healing and authenticity, not a mental disorder that could return like a cancer. So together we spent the next year and a half submitting what felt like every medical report about this procedure and the results on a patient's mental health from Belgium, Serbia, the UK, the USA, Canada, Germany, France, Argentina, Iran, and Brazil, going back and forth with the health department who kept arguing the points, requesting more studies. And all the while, I'm not sure, but I think they were updating their criteria to make this less possible again in the future, rather than recognising that this is an actual health need and working it into the system to accommodate a minority community that also does pay taxes. So, the thing that I'd also realised is that this had been done retrospectively, and I was happy and healthier and leading a better life for myself that they seemed to just actively ignore from the beginning. And I'd found some conviction at this point because I had been resigned to this not working out a few years ago, but I had a few nights to think about this, and if there was ever a word that I was really beginning to be a little aggravated by, it was that word remission. You see, unfortunately, my mum, she, who I think actually is responsible for this entire insane story, she died of breast cancer after a long 11-year battle and never actually made it into remission. So it really began to dawn on me of like how offensive this actually was, knowing that they would have read that in my medical history reports. So I really do try to find the good in people, but I didn't like these people very much. Blow, blow. So another 6 months went by and I received a call from the solicitors. The department had reviewed everything we'd submitted and they'd made their decision. They weren't willing to look at any further submissions, so stop applying, stop bugging us, Andrew, and they'd hoped they'd helped. So 26th of June, no, not the solicitors, the department. The solicitors weren't saying stop bugging us. They were lovely. Yeah. Then my letter. 27th of June 2016. Dear Mr. Guy, regarding the appeal of the decision not to provide financial assistance under the Medical Treatment Overseas program. I'm writing with regard to your appeal of the decision made by the Medical Treatment Overseas program on the 12th of December 2014. I note your application was received on the 18th of June of 2014 to not approve your application based on the criteria based on the fact that it did not meet all 4 mandatory criteria. Your appeal was received on the 16th of February 2016 and has now been considered by the Commonwealth's Chief Medical Office. Taking into account all of this additional information, I consider the treatment you received in Australia prior to your trip to San Francisco did not alleviate your condition. I have approved assistance for your treatment. On the evidence, I can confirm that your case meets the criteria. The department then did, of course, spend the next few months scrutinising every receipt I gave them, but I did receive an reimbursement and I did pay my father back. So, it's 3 years later. I'm feeling a little bit lighter in myself. A lot's changed for the better. There's a lovely amount of trans stories in the media, which I'm really enjoying. However, tonight I'm mildly frustrated by what our PM is saying about trans youth. So, without anybody to stop my drunk dial-up for a wine or two, I write to the Morrison government. Something I don't really mention that often as well is that, well, Scotty from marketing used to actually be my boss about 15 years ago. I never actually spoke to him back then, but I emailed anyway to remind him of who I was. Scotty, I've bloody well been to hell and back, mate, and I don't think you're getting this quite right. I think we should meet, and I'll just enlighten you a bit. Not at all expecting a reply again, and really not even sure if every word made sense. A month later, I was invited to meet with his chief of staff for 15 minutes. We had 12 minutes on the day after some room mess-ups, but I did stay. I basically summarised a lot of the problems within trans healthcare in Australia as best as I could. And then COVID's happened, which is quite ironic with how amazing our Australian health system actually has shown itself to be. So I will be staying in touch with them, and hopefully we'll bring you my trans story part 2 in the years to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing that. Our final speaker for this evening is Tia Uglow. Tia is an author, speaker and activist. She led the global campaign for a trans pride emoji, and her latest book, Loud and Proud 2020, is an anthology of speeches from 150 years of LGBTQ plus activism. She works at Google. I had the pleasure of sharing the stage with her at the Opera House last year, and I'm really proud to introduce her to you tonight. Please make welcome Tia Uglow.
I'm last, right? I hope no one has any plans. It's an audience. It's a very strange thing, an audience. It's exactly a year, actually, more or less, since the last time I spoke to an audience, which was at the Opera House. Just after Tom Hanks' wife had been on stage, unfortunately. So I found myself quarantining slightly before everyone else started quarantining, and by the time I came out of quarantining, everyone else was quarantining, and you get into that habit. And it's been a very funny year. Sometimes an attack does not feel like an attack, more like a cloud, or just gravity pulling you down. Slow enough, and you do not feel it at all. It just feels unfair and endless. It's only later, when you can fast forward through the years, that you see how merciless and unrelenting the barrage of disinformation is, fueled by fear. Nothing good will come of that. This is not the start of my story. This is just for context. A framing device. I am a very willing but rather lazy activist. I pop online from time to time to take the temperature. Yesterday, the Twitter was sharing Michelle Telfer's submission to the Senate. I don't know if anyone saw it. Yes, exactly. They have an inquiry on media diversity, and in her submission she lists with excruciating clarity the 45 headlines in 12 months from that national disgrace of a paper, who quite fortunately either gave up or got distracted. It's quite hard to continue a barrage like that when there is actually some serious news. They've tried, though. They do their bit. Telfer is the head of the Royal Children's Hospital gender clinic in Melbourne. But really this is about trans kids. It's always about trans kids. I was once a trans kid. I imagine many of you were too. So that seems like a good place to start. My name is T, and this is my trans story. Sitting comfortably? Good. Well then, there was once a little person, human, called... They were about 3 or 4 years old when they suddenly realised that they were different. Can't really start like that. It's a trick, it's a trope. The trans existence is rich and complex, and never before have we really been able to bring together the kind of people to give us an idea of quite how rich, quite how diverse quite how extraordinary. It's been just a total pleasure. Thank you all. Especially the skipping, quite unexpected. Our stories aren't the same. The same thing we have, actually, if anything, is the shared language of pain and suffering. I sometimes think that the only thing we have in common is our struggle, both with society and with our bodies. But as it goes, when I was 3 or 4, I knew. I just didn't know what it was that I knew. Back then, all I knew was that I was different. And in 1970s Kent, whatever it was not cool. I don't remember developing a strategy. I wasn't thrown out on the street. I just clearly decided not to know as fast and as sincerely as possible. The one thing that I did know that I never managed to fully erase was that there had to have been, or that there surely had to be a switchover day. A day when all the little boys became little girls, and vice versa. I trusted in switchover day more than I trusted Santa or the Tooth Fairy. I believed it so much that I began to feel rather sad for the little girls who would soon be boys. But it turns out there is no Santa, and there was no switchover day. Still not really over that. Each of our childhoods has shaped our reality. What is real becomes, for us, what is normal. My childhood, to me, was completely normal. I had caring parents, annoying siblings, school. I kept to myself. I learnt to be a boy, to do boy stuff like rugby and Boy Scouts and go to an all-boys school and be head boy and, all boy-y. I'm also autistic, so for me that was normal too. I doubt that helped. But life was normal because like everyone else actually, I had no baseline to compare it to. I still don't. To me, being trans is normal, and everyone else is bisexual, and you're all just in denial. So my story is about letting each day be my normal, not your normal. I wish I'd known all the labels, but then, of course, we didn't have them. I had no idea those labels existed, let alone applied to me. Labels are curious things. It's almost as if I collect stigma, my designer labels. They are my license to be different, to be difficult, to be all of these things. They are my authentic self. Now, personally, I think authenticity is broadly horseshit. Because it is no more authentic of me to declaim sort of psych ward war stories or discuss the pros and cons of Seroquel than it is when I'm pretending to be interested in where you found the delightful wine that I'm pretending to drink. Or the sports ball. My partner Fee is obsessed with the sports ball. However, I will pretend, and my pretense matters because I have learnt the hard way that people feel far more challenged when my authentic self neglects to make life easy for them, when I cannot ingress their authentic reality. That's when the eyes start to roll. But whoever I am, I came out as this latest me in my mid-30s, and it was very unexpected. It was like, surprise! I felt very lost. I felt very fake. I went to my therapist and she said, this won't solve anything, this won't solve the other problems. And I was like, this is the problem. I need you to untrans me. I am fine. I have children. I had always thought of myself as an ally. And that I'd also felt of myself as too white and too male. These days, the quiet white male is my favourite kind of ally. And that phrase, lived experience, is important because that is not fake. And it is normal. Normal to me as your life is to you. You simply can't make assumptions about what anyone's normal is. No one ought to describe a normal that was never their normal, a life they never lived. No one should speak as if they know my mind. It is a normal they cannot know. Yet they do. Over and over, they give us labels like trans, and yet object when we label them back. Cis is not a slur, it's an antonym. They want to support us, but need us to pay our own way. They like to debate us in the abstract, rather than letting us speak, or speaking to us. We want to tell our own stories. Why events like this are so important. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Lisa. I thought that discrimination would be visible. A human I could swear at, or a bar fight I might diffuse with quick wit and charm. I honestly used to daydream about abuse I experienced. We do still get shouted at, darling. And I practice my retorts, my bon mots, my esprit d'escalier. But getting beaten up is actually much less interesting. There's normally an embarrassing flurry of squawks and slaps and hair being pulled and then crying and snot. Online is horrendously clean and explicit, and you can revisit it. And it's frustratingly illogical and insane and invisible, and I think actually quite a lot of it unintentional, attritional, yet unassailable. It's like a silent conspiracy. No one knows nothing. You don't notice because there is nothing to notice. The discrimination is in my interest or supportive but concerned. In inclusion speak, I am vulnerable to negative assumptions. On the street, I am mental. I get asked a lot about my support network. No one knows. And I think that's why they call it unconscious bias. The words jar with my life itself, the same kind of reality jarring I get with my autism or depression or simply being female. It is patronizing, it is disingenuous. The actual experience is objective. I'm living it. I can see my salary stagnate. I was removed from my team. My influence base has shifted. I don't know where it's gone. I feel isolated. And this kindness is a kindness that has made me sicker and sicker. I'm not hated, just diminished in people's eyes. And I get to watch in slow motion as my capacity reverses until I am basically a child to them. And that's just being female. Meanwhile, as a trans woman, the simplest rights, like being free to exist or to defend our rights, are still not simple, are still not accessible. I mean, all of this is cyclical, of course. In 1902, allowing women to vote was a radical and violently opposed idea in Australia. And amusingly, it was helped by the usual misogynist political machinations backfiring. Politicians are the worst. But that didn't include Indigenous women, of course, or men. Having stolen the land we're on, it's hard not to be conscious of the damage we inflict, the discrimination they face, and even in the suffrage in the mid-60s has done little to right those wrongs. It is a leaking tap of national shame that no one seems to have sufficient desire to address. LGBTQ people would certainly have been disenfranchised if our queerness was written on our skin. But we hid in our white straitjackets and our white cis eggshells. I'm not judging. We fought other battles for the right to raise children or get married or not get sent down for fucking. I'm still not completely convinced the marriage one is a win, except politically, of course. That took a while as well. I mean, after all, there's written evidence that gay marriage happened in ancient Egypt, not on bits of sun-baked clay, but in the Bible and the Sifra. It's Leviticus, if you're really into scripture. Being in the Bible is not the point, though. The point is, it was normal until the Judeo-Christian god Hashem legislated against it, somehow, and then it became abnormal and immoral. Who made that decision? Anyway, 5,000 years later, the Australian Parliament fixed that. Dean Smith, Tim Wilson gave memorable speeches. Penny Wong denounced the vitriolic debate that surrounded that unbelievably unnecessary plebiscite. And George Brandis. I mean, George did wait until the fight was over, to share his unequivocal impassioned support. Like all political ephemera, he said, much fades into history. But people do remember the 1967 referendum, that great act of inclusion of Indigenous Australians, and I predict that, like the 1967 referendum, this decision by the Australian people will come to be seen as one of those occasional shining moments which stand out in our nation's history, about which people will still speak with admiration in decades, indeed in centuries to come. And it is stirring, and it is heartfelt, and it is total bullshit. But you know that. In the real world, the 1967 referendum and the 2017 Marriage Act are shining memorials to Aussie bigotry. They sit comfortably on the national timeline, repression being a national pastime. My trans story is part of that story. It's all the same story, all across the world. It's not Australia. Same horse, different jockey. Here in New South Wales, I had to have a vaginoplasty before I could change my birth certificate. I don't actually know anymore. I think there was one surgeon in Australia that can perform that operation. The out-of-pocket costs come to tens of thousands of dollars. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. It is bullshit. I like to imagine applying equivalent conditions to new drivers. To get your P plates, you'd need to visit the only car dealership in Australia and buy a $20,000 car, and then you can pay to upgrade to a full license. Seems equally fair. After surgery, 2 more doctors had to examine me. Actually, one of them refused, but signed the piece of paper because they were too embarrassed. And I'm not going to say who it was because they might get into trouble for not actually examining me and agree that, yes, the doc had indeed neutered me, that I was emasculated, evirated, caponized, and, frankly, that I was very happy about it. It was a bit confusing when Jermaine Greer insisted that the procedure didn't make me a woman, because that is exactly what the government told me did make a woman. My operation changed the world for me, but it genuinely did not change anything for the world. It is a barbaric and a very expensive way to get a passport with an F. I'm a child, I'm from the UK, as you can probably tell. not a natural Aussie accent. And I'm a child of Thatcher and a casualty of Section 28. Does everyone know Section 28? Everyone should know Section 28. It's like one of those unthinkable 1960s psychology experiments on kids. Every child in the country took part in this experiment. From 1988, it became illegal in the UK to teach awareness of LGBT in schools. And adults were so scared that children knew far more about Santa than they did about queers. They knew. Everyone was so scared that I was told nothing. I mean, I didn't even know there was a Section 28. Even years later, I didn't know about it. And because of that, because I didn't know that, I didn't know that there was anything I could ask. I didn't know what I was meant to be asking. I didn't know who I was meant to be asking. I didn't know how little I knew. Instead of being educated, I was homeschooled by Ace Ventura, growing up ignorant of myself and utterly illiterate. Section 28 lasted for 25 years. If it had been an experiment, at least we would have data. The deep psychological scars would have borne fruit, however bitter. But it wasn't. So no one gets to learn a fucking thing. This is a battle I will fight all my life. Not the one with the TERFs, not the one with the government. The one with my own deep-rooted disgust and self-loathing. The side salad to my dysphoria. Baroness Knight, who introduced it in 1988, said later that she was thinking of the well-being of the children. I was one of the children, and I'm dying to ask whose well-being she meant. Or if baby transsexuals were simply acceptable collateral damage. Now you must know, of course, that Mark Latham has his own version. A sparkling New South Wales edition of Section 28. It's in committee, and someone with a naughty twinkle made him chair of the Education Committee. So he's shepherding his own bill. It's called the Parental Rights Bill. It's targeted at trans kids rather than the entire LGBTQ community. And actually, because of that, sometimes it feels like we're on our own a little bit. There are not that many of us. We're just in the paper a lot. The kids are certainly alone. It's almost funny that Latham thinks activists are teaching kids to be trans when it's the exact opposite. I am not straight. I am not cisgender. But I had to learn how to be straight until everyone, including me, believed that I was straight. What scares me the most is the sight of people in power who believe that principle, censoring knowledge, provides a better outcome than a full and comprehensive education for all, that keep people stupid is a viable health plan. I suffer from dysphoria, not being trans. This is an illness. Well, there are illnesses. I mean, there are illnesses that attack you, or that corrode you, or even some way you damage yourself, your own mind and body, in order to show that you are sick and suffering. But I can't actually think of any others where the doctors insist the patient suffer the irreversible indignity of puberty before accepting that they know their own mind enough to say that they didn't want that puberty. Or where the government expects you to pay tens of thousands of dollars for major surgery before its judges will judge you or judge your condition authentic. This doesn't happen to other people. Denying that education leads to adults like me, those trans kids will still be trans when they grow up, will spend painful years in the closet. Like me, they will have lifelong mental health problems. Or we could give kids time and space and information, educate them, help their parents, love them, accept, affirm, support the teachers, support the parents, see what happens. Those are the options. You're normal, or they're normal. I never knew, and will never know, what it's like to feel comfortable in my gender. I will always be trans. I would trade all my privilege for something most of you don't realise you have.
So that brings that part to an end tonight. Thank you to all our speakers. You have all been incredible. You've brought something special, unique, rare and beautiful. And I've been privileged to sit here and hear those stories. But it's not over yet. We're just going to leave you with a very special treat. You might remember our first speaker mentioned they're a lover of musical theatre, especially sometimes Sunday in the Park with George. So I'd like to invite the accompanist, Andy Freeburn, to the stage and welcome back Joel Murray to sing Children and Art from Sunday in the Park with George.
You would have liked us, Nana, you would. Nana, we make things, Nana, they're good. Just as you said from the start, children and art. Children and art, we should be happy. Nana, we're blue. What can we do? We were amazing. We were a sight. Nana, I mean it, all color and light. When you stand from afar, we twinkle and shimmer like stars. You would have liked us. Aren't we all beautiful? There they are, there he is, there she is, there they are. Nana, we're everywhere. You would have loved us so much. This is my family, this is the lot. After I go, this is all that I've got, honey. Aren't we all beautiful though? You would have liked her. Nana did things no one had done. Nana was funny. Nana was fun. Nana spent money when we had none. Nana said, honey, don't be so blue. It's not so much do as you like as it is that you like what you do. Nana said, darling, no need for drama. A little less thinking, a little more feeling. I'm just quoting Nana. The child is so sweet and the girls are so rapturous. Isn't it lovely how artists can capture us? You would have liked her. Honey, I'm wrong. You would have loved her. Nana enjoyed things. Nana was smart. See how she shimmers. I mean, from the heart. I know, honey, you might not agree, but just wait till you get here and see. This is my family tree. Listen to me. No. Listen to Nana. Children and art. Children and art.
Can we please welcome back to the stage Olivia, Stewart, Victoria, Anthony, Andrew Guy, T, and Rusty. Please give it up for the cast of My Trans Stories. Get on your feet, people! Thank you so much. You've been an incredibly generous audience tonight. And thank you, Mardi Gras. Thank you, Trans Pride Australia. Thank you, AJ. And I'd love to acknowledge Teddy Cook and all the amazing work you do at Trans Hub. Thank you so much and good night.